PNCA Money Desk. Now, the medium-term budget policy statement will be delivered this afternoon, and our team is already setting up to bring you that news from Cape Town. Now, back here in Joburg, we have John Loos, economist from FNB in studio, to talk us about more of what we could expect from this statement. John, let's start just with a brief explainer about what the medium-term budget policy statement is.
Well, the intention of the medium-term budget policy statement is to outline expenditure priorities by and large for the next 3 years. We don't just budget for one fiscal year in advance anymore. Since the 1990s, it's been more a 3-year projection of expenditure priorities and growth and so on. But I think that what it also serves a useful purpose as doing is to just see where we are. We budgeted in February, the main budget's in February, so how are we doing in terms of revenue and expenditure estimates, and then how do we change, possibly, given that projected revenues, in this case, the belief is that we've probably got about a 60 billion rand revenue shortfall running. We'll see what the minister says, what the numbers are. So how do we plug that shortfall? It's not going according to budget on the revenue side, the budget's from February. So how do we adjust? How do we tweak the spending to fit in, or don't we? And possibly even preparing us for some sort of tax increase. It's unlikely that you get tax increases now. That's normally at the February budget or changes now. But does the minister start preparing us for something like a VAT increase or so on to plug the revenue shortfall? So I think it's a sort of a midterm, interim budget. How are we doing relative to budget in February, and signalling possible changes, if any, when the budget comes around in February too.
John, what will you be listening out for to either bring a sense of optimism or maybe a sense of pessimism?
Well, at the moment, I think the first thing I'll be looking for is to see how realistic the economic growth projections are in the minister's forecast, what Treasury thinks of the economy going forward. Ourselves, we think that there could be, after a dip in the economy this year, there could be a slight improvement during the course of the next 3 years. Let's see what National Treasury says in that regard. We don't believe it'll shoot the lights out. Optimism, pessimism, difficult to say. I don't think it'll be a wonderful budget because the revenue shortfall has to be plugged. And the thinking seems to be that Treasury is still in the movie of hiking taxes somewhere. There's been speculation about a VAT increase. Some are against that. Or will it just be possibly on the personal income tax side, just allowing inflation bracket creep to put people into higher tax brackets at next year's budget? Tough to say, but I think, unfortunately, I think Treasury is still in the movie of either cutting expenditure. There's a lot of talk about cutting expenditure, or hiking rates, tax rates somewhere, which isn't necessarily wonderful news coming. I would obviously like to see more tax cutting to stimulate the economy, but I don't think we're there yet. And then one would look for, and here I don't expect good news either, but there's been talk of various, sort of curtailing of capex projects. That does suffer often when government's got cash flow issues. Now, this is could have been a concern for many years, is government fixed investment. If you go back to 1976, government fixed investment peaked at 12.2% of GDP. Big infrastructure investment at the time, big economic infrastructure investment too. In 2022, we were at 2.4% of GDP. Parastatals, 5.5% of GDP in 1980, only 1.4%. So there's not enough capex coming from government now. Unfortunately, given the tight cash flow constraints, I don't expect that to change. So it doesn't look like there's wonderful news coming our way at the moment.
Let's go on that infrastructure projects that are needed, because if we have more infrastructure projects, we will get more investment, and we also need investment for these projects. So it's how do we ensure this investment, not just from local investors, but from international investors, if we're not signaling it in the budget, saying that we are open for investment and we are open for these infrastructure projects?
Well, I think what it's coming down to slowly is that the private sector will be playing a bigger role in this economy, being allowed to play a bigger or more meaningful, be it on the railways in future, be it in the harbours, be it in producing electricity, and it will be more the private sector infrastructure projects that proliferate, hopefully. I think that's where we're going. I think government's in a corner now. Its debt to GDP ratio is rising. It's got, according to many, a bloated civil service. So it's in a bit of a corner. I think the way out of that is to open up more of the economy, more of what the state-owned enterprises have been providing to the private sector, to provide infrastructure, to own it, to profit from it. That would be the way of boosting fixed investment, I think, for the foreseeable future.
Just a quick one on South African consumers and just ordinary South Africans. Not a lot of us care about the budget or what is said in the statement, but it does affect our pockets. What should we be listening out for? What is the best that we could hope for from this medium-term budget policy statement this afternoon?
Well, I think you're probably not going to get much of an indication on tax changes, maybe some preparation for tax changes. And as I said, it's more likely up than down. But the tax changes generally come in February. I mean, I think, what we need to hope for at best is that government will have ways to get its debt to GDP ratio under control. It's not good short-term news, but we need to start reversing the ratings downgrades into ratings upgrades to boost the investor confidence. Right now, the investor community is looking for concrete evidence that the Minister of Finance is getting spending under control, getting debt under control. That's short-term pain often, but in the longer term, that's ultimately what brings back investor confidence and investment and job creation from private sources. So it's more of short-term pain for long-term gain in all likelihood.
Thank you so much for your time this morning.
It's a pleasure.
And that was John Loos from FNB.